I still remember the sharp crash that jolted me awake, metal scraping against asphalt, the hollow slam echoing like a gunshot in the quiet of dawn. It wasn't thunder, though the sky was bruised with storm clouds. No, it was my trash can, tipped over again, its lid rolling across the street like some cruel bell ringing out the start of another battle I never asked for. The smell of damp garbage hit me the moment I opened the door. That rancid cocktail of rotting leftovers, sour milk, and wet paper. My bag of coffee grounds had burst open across the sidewalk. Black grit scattered like ashes at a funeral. And there he was, standing at the curb with that smirk, the smug 30-year-old HOA enforcer, clipboard tucked under his arm like a badge of authority. "Can't seem to keep it upright, old man," he called out, his voice slicing through the morning air, taunting. I clenched my fist but said nothing. My hands shook, partly from anger, partly from the chill in the wind. This was no accident. He had knocked it over, just like yesterday, just like last week. Each time with that same cocky tilt of the chin, daring me to challenge him. Neighbors' curtains twitched. I could feel eyes on me, silent witnesses behind glass. Too afraid, or too tired, or tired to step in. This was how he operated, in plain sight, yet untouchable. Every slam of the trash can was more than noise. It was a message. I bent down slowly, my knees creaking, to gather the spilled garbage. Coffee grounds clung to my palms. An apple core rolled into the gutter, bobbing in dirty rainwater. He just stood there, watching me like a cat watching a wounded mouse, clipboard scratching as he jotted something down. Another violation, no doubt. Another warning that would arrive in my mailbox stamped with the HOA's seal. I wanted to shout. I wanted to demand why a 30-year-old kid thought he could torment me, a man twice his age who had paid off this house with decades of sweat and sacrifice. But the words lodged in my throat. Because the truth was, I already knew why. Power. He liked the power. I straightened, my back aching, garbage bag in hand, and locked eyes with him. For a moment, the world was quiet except for the distant rumble of thunder. His smirk widened, as if he could already taste victory, as if I was just another box he checked off on his clipboard of petty conquests. But here's the thing about men like him. They think people like me, 60, graying, shoulders worn by time, are easy targets. That will just take it. That dignity can be shoved aside as easily as a trash can on the curb. They're wrong. As I dragged the can upright, the thunder cracked loud enough to rattle windows. And in that sound, in that moment, something shifted inside me. My patience was gone. My silence was gone. He thought he had the upper hand, but what he didn't know was that I was done playing his game. So when I looked at him, really looked, I let him see it in my eyes. Not fear, not surrender, but resolve. Because I already had a plan. A trap that would turn his little power play into a humiliation he would never see coming. And as the storm rolled in over the rooftops, I asked myself one question. The same one I'll ask you now. What happens when the man who always knocks over the trash can finally runs into one that knocks back? I'm 60 years old, though sometimes it feels like I've lived 3 lifetimes already. My name doesn't matter as much as what I stand for. A man who worked hard, kept his head down, and built a life brick by brick until I could finally sit on the porch of a house I paid off with my own hands. For 30 years, I worked as a machinist in a factory that chewed men up and spat them out. I still carry the scars on my knuckles, the permanent grime under my fingernails, the ringing in my ears from the roar of steel on steel. That house, a modest ranch-style home on a quiet cul-de-sac, was my prize, my sanctuary, a place where I thought I'd finally have peace. My wife passed a few years ago, and my grown kids live in different states now, busy raising their families. But the house still carried her touch, the wind chimes she hung on the porch, the rose bushes she planted along the fence, the hummingbird feeder she insisted on filling, even though I always said it would attract ants. Every corner of that property held a memory, and I guarded it like a treasure. That's why I joined the neighborhood when the HOA was first formed years back. Back then, it seemed like a good idea. neighbors coming together to keep things orderly, to stop lawns from becoming overgrown jungles, or cars from rusting out in driveways. I paid my dues, showed up to meetings, even grilled burgers at block parties. But things change when people like him get power. His name was Derek, 30 years old, too young to have that kind of authority, but old enough to believe he knew better than everyone else. He wore collared shirts tucked into slim-fit slacks, carried a leather clipboard, and walked around like he was the sheriff of a town that hadn't asked for one. At first it was small. He'd leave notes about proper trash bin placement, saying my can was 6 inches too far from the curb. 6 inches! Another time he warned me about excessive weeds, even though my wife's roses had always grown wild, spilling over in tangles of red and green. I ignored it, thinking it would pass. HOAs go through phases, I told myself. Some young hotshot wants to prove himself. Then he settles down. But Derek didn't settle. He escalated. The first true confrontation happened on a Saturday morning, one of those early spring days when the air smells faintly of cut grass and wet earth. I was out front, sweeping the porch, when I saw him standing by my mailbox, clipboard in hand, scribbling something down. "Morning," I called out. He looked up, expression blank, and said, "Your trash can was left out past the approved collection hours. That's a violation." I blinked. Collection was yesterday. I brought it in as soon as I got home from the store. He shook his head, tapping the clipboard with his pen. The HOA guidelines state that trash cans must be retrieved within 2 hours of pickup. Yours sat for at least 3. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his face stayed stone cold. "Are you serious?" I asked. He nodded once. "This is your first official warning." That was when I knew this wasn't about rules. This was about control. Derek wasn't just enforcing guidelines. He was inventing them, twisting them, weaponizing them. Over the next weeks, the warnings piled up. Too many dandelions in the lawn. Porch light left on past midnight. Improper paint wear on my shutters. Each one felt like a needle prick, small but relentless. Neighbors whispered, some sympathized but wouldn't speak up. Others avoided me altogether, afraid they'd be next. The sense of community I once cherished was souring, replaced with suspicion and silence. But Derek wasn't content with paper threats. He wanted spectacle. That's when he started knocking over my trash can. The first time, I thought it was kids. But then I caught him. Broad daylight, strolling past, clipboard tucked under his arm, giving the can a deliberate shove with his polished shoe. The sound echoed down the street, garbage spilling across the curb like a wound. When I confronted him, his response was chillingly casual. "Maybe if you followed the rules," he said, "the can wouldn't be such an issue." He walked away with that same smirk, leaving me to clean up the mess. I started noticing patterns after that. Every time the can was knocked over, a violation notice followed. It was his calling card, his way of marking territory, of reminding me that he held the power. But here's the thing about men like Derek. They don't see the cost of their games. They don't see the way humiliation grinds you down, the way frustration simmers into something darker. I'd wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, imagining the sound of metal slamming onto asphalt. I'd pace the living room, staring at the rose bushes my wife planted, wondering what she'd think of me if she saw me bowing under the weight of this petty tyrant. That's when the stakes became clear. This wasn't just about trash cans. It wasn't just about rules. This was about dignity, about the right to live in my own home without being harassed by a 30-year-old bully with a clipboard. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized Derek wasn't just testing me. He was testing everyone. If I let him win, if I let him grind me down, then no one else in the neighborhood would stand a chance when he turned his sights on them. The trash can was just the beginning. I could feel it in the way he lingered outside my property, eyes scanning like a predator searching for weakness. I could hear it in the mutters of neighbors who feared their own gardens, their own fences, would be next. The writing was on the wall. This was going to escalate, and when it did, I would be ready. The weeks that followed felt like living under siege. Derek's campaign wasn't a single blow, but a series of cuts, shallow enough that no one else thought it worth fighting, but deep enough that I bled dignity with every passing day. It started small, as always. A letter slipped under my door, stamped with the HOA letterhead in red. Notice of violation, the charge this time. Improper hedge trimming. My hedges, the same ones I'd shaped for 20 years, were apparently an inch too tall. I laughed bitterly when I read it, but the fine printed at the bottom, $50, wiped the smile clean off my face. $50 for an inch of green. The next week, another letter. This time it was excessive exterior wear on gutter paint. Then, non-compliant mailbox height. Each came with its own fine, small at first but stacking quickly. I tried appealing. I wrote letters, attended a board meeting, and stood before a half circle of HOA members while Derek lounged in the corner, arms crossed, smirk plastered across his face. Rules are rules, he said when I finished my protest. We can't make exceptions. The others nodded reluctantly, avoiding my eyes. I could see the fear in them, fear of becoming his next target. And so the fines kept coming. The trash can remained his favorite weapon. By now it was a ritual. Pickup day would come, I'd drag the bin to the curb, and sometime within the next 24 hours, crash. Garbage strewn across the street like confetti at a parade I never wanted. One afternoon, I heard it happen. The slam, the laughter. I rushed outside and caught him in the act, clipboard still in hand. "Why?" I shouted, voice cracking. "What do you get out of this?" He tilted his head, feigning innocence. "Just doing my job, sir. Making sure our neighborhood doesn't slip into chaos." Chaos? I gestured at the banana peels, the torn bags, the coffee grounds smeared across my sidewalk. "This is chaos." His smirk widened. "Then maybe you should keep a tighter lid on things." The double meaning wasn't lost on me. Neighbors peeked through blinds. One couple across the street stood on their porch but didn't move closer. Cowards, or maybe just wise enough not to invite Derek's wrath. I felt alone. Alone in my own neighborhood, in my own yard. I cleaned the mess again, my back aching, hands trembling with rage. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every rumble of the wind sounded like another bin hitting the ground. Board meetings became spectacles. Derek would call me out in front of others, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Mr. Thompson," he'd say, never my first name, always something formal and sharp. "Have you addressed your continuing issue with non-compliant waste storage?" Neighbors would murmur. Some shook their heads in pity, while others shook their heads in annoyance. I wanted to scream that this was his doing, his vendetta, but the rules, his rules, painted me as the careless one. In one meeting, I slammed my fist on the table. "You're targeting me! Everyone here knows it!" Derek leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded. "Targeting you? No, sir. Enforcing the rules. If you feel singled out, perhaps it's because your violations are uniquely persistent." The laughter that rippled through the room wasn't cruel, but it stung all the same. He had turned me into the neighborhood clown. By the third month, the fines had reached nearly $1,000. My savings, the little I had set aside, were bleeding out. I skipped dinners, stretched meals of beans and rice, and told my kids on the phone that everything was fine. I couldn't admit that a 30-year-old with a clipboard was dismantling my life piece by piece. The humiliation was worse than the money. I stopped tending the roses my wife had planted, stopped sitting on the porch with my morning coffee, stopped waving to neighbors. Every time I stepped outside, I felt his eyes on me, whether or not he was actually there. Derek had become a shadow, a constant presence, haunting every crack in the sidewalk, every squeak of the trash can's wheels. But not everyone was blind. One evening, as I dragged the bin back from the curb, my neighbor Martha shuffled over. She was in her 70s, frail but sharp-eyed. She looked around before leaning close. "He's been watching you," she whispered. "I've seen it from my window. He knocks it over on purpose. Every time." I nodded, throat tight. "Then why don't you tell the board?" Her eyes darted nervously. "Because he'll come for me next. He already told me my shutters don't match the community aesthetic." "I can't fight him, dear." She patted my arm, sympathy soft in her eyes. Then she retreated as quickly as she'd come. That was the thing. They all knew. They all saw. But Derek had them cowed, afraid of the spotlight he'd turned on me. The breaking point came one rainy night. I had dragged the bin to the curb earlier that day, careful as ever. Around midnight, thunder cracked, and I heard it. The metallic crash, the wet slap of garbage hitting asphalt. I bolted to the door, and there he was, standing in the rain. Umbrella in one hand, clipboard in the other, nudging the bin with his polished shoe like it was a game. When he saw me, he didn't flinch, didn't apologize, he just grinned, rain dripping down his smug face. "You should really secure that better," he called, raising his voice over the storm. "Wouldn't want another violation, would we?" That was it. I stood there soaked, fists clenched, heart hammering. For the first time, I wasn't humiliated. I was furious. Fury burned through me, hotter than the shame, stronger than the exhaustion. And in that fury, an idea was born. A plan. Something that would end this once and for all. Over the next few days, I moved carefully, quietly. I stopped reacting to his provocations. When he smirked at me in meetings, I looked away. When he tipped my bin, I cleaned it up without a word. I let him believe he had won, that the 60-year-old man had finally been broken. But inside, I was plotting. I spent long nights on the computer, reading HOA bylaws, studying state ordinances, combing through every line of legal jargon that Derek loved to twist. And buried deep in those documents, I found something. A weakness. The kind of weakness that a man like Derek, arrogant, untouchable, addicted to control, would never see coming. And when the moment came, I would be ready. Because if Derek thought a trash can was his weapon, he was about to learn what happens when the trash fights back. The morning of the showdown was eerily calm. The sun burned pale through a haze of gray clouds, the kind of muted light that makes every color look flat, every sound sharper. I wheeled my trash can down to the curb, just like I always did. But this time, there was something different about it, something Derek couldn't see. Inside the can wasn't just a bag of garbage. Hidden beneath the trash was a small camera, wired carefully, its lens peeking out from a hole I had drilled near the rim. I'd spent weeks setting it up, making sure it could survive rain, heat, and rough handling. The footage streamed directly to a hard drive in my living room. It wasn't elegant, but it didn't need to be. It just needed to catch him in the act. And Derek, arrogant as ever, couldn't resist a stage. By noon, the can was waiting patiently by the curb. I sat inside, blinds cracked, heart pounding like a war drum. Every car that drove by made me flinch. Every step on the sidewalk sent adrenaline rushing. Then I saw him, clipboard under his arm, polished shoes clicking against the pavement, that smug stride like he owned the street. He slowed as he approached my house, looked left, then right, checking for witnesses. And then, with a theatrical little shove of his shoe, he tipped the can. Garbage tumbled out, spilling across the gutter, and the camera caught every second. By the time he walked away, a smirk plastered across his face. I already had the footage pulled up on my laptop, crystal clear. Derek, the HOA enforcer, deliberately knocked over my can. I sat back, breathless, staring at the screen. Months of humiliation, sleepless nights, and whispered doubts, all crystallized into a single, undeniable clip. But I wasn't finished. Proof alone wasn't enough. Derek was slippery, manipulative. He'd find a way to spin it. No, I needed more. I needed spectacles. And I knew exactly where to stage it. The next HOA board meeting was packed. Residents filled the folding chairs, muttering to each other. The air smelled of coffee and nervous anticipation. Derek sat at the front, as always, clipboard neatly stacked with papers, his expression bored but superior. When my name came up on the agenda, "Mr. Thompson, ongoing violations," he leaned forward, ready to enjoy another public shaming. "Mr. Thompson," he began, voice smooth as oil, "it seems your issues with trash containment continue. At this point, the board must consider escalating fines." "Actually," I cut him off, standing slowly. My knees ached, but my voice was steady. "I have something I'd like to share with the board, with everyone." Murmurs rippled through the room. Derek arched an eyebrow, smirk twitching. "Is that so?" I pulled out the laptop, plugged it into the projector, and with a single click, the screen lit up. There he was, Derek in living color, tipping my trash can. The sound echoed through the speakers, the scrape of metal, the slam of the lid, the laughter under his breath. Gasps filled the room. Chairs scraped as people leaned forward. For a long moment, silence held. Then Martha, my quiet 70-year-old neighbor, spoke up. Her voice quivered, but it carried. I've seen him do it too. From my window, many times. Her words cracked the dam. Others chimed in. A man from across the street, a couple down the block. All of them, voices rising, confirming what they had seen, but been too afraid to admit. Derek's face paled. His smirk faltered. He opened his mouth, stammering. This is taken out of context. Out of context, I barked, louder than I intended. How do you shove a trash can out of context? Laughter broke out. Nervous at first, then swelling, rolling through the room like thunder. The board president, a mild man named Carl, cleared his throat. Mr. Derek, this appears to be clear evidence of misconduct. Derek slammed his fist on the table. This is a setup. He tampered with the footage. I stepped closer, every muscle trembling but strong. You've humiliated me for months. You've fined me, threatened me, turned my neighbors against me. And for what? For power? For the thrill of kicking over a 60-year-old man's trash can? The room was silent again, every eye on Derek. His arrogance had nowhere to hide. Rules are rule, he muttered weakly. No, I said, voice steady, strong. Rules are supposed to protect us, not to be twisted by bullies. Carl nodded slowly. Effective immediately, Derek is suspended pending full review. We'll convene to determine permanent action. Suspended. The word rang like a bell. But Derek couldn't stand humiliation. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair over. His face was red, jaw clenched. You're all fools, he spat, eyes darting from neighbor to neighbor. This neighborhood will fall apart without me. You'll see. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. For a moment, the room was still. Then, like the first crack of dawn, people began to murmur, to smile, to clap me on the back. You stood up to him. About time someone did. Should have happened months ago. Martha squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the wind move through the roses. For the first time in months, the street felt calm. No smirking clipboard, no crash of metal on asphalt. I should have felt triumphant, and in a way, I did. But mostly I felt relief. Heavy, bone-deep relief. Derek wasn't gone yet. The board still had to make its ruling, but his mask was shattered. His power was broken, and for the first time, the neighbors had seen him for what he truly was. For the first time, I wasn't alone, and deep down I knew. Whatever came next, the worst was already over, because the trash can had finally been knocked back. The days after the board meeting felt like walking out into sunshine after a long, brutal storm. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. No jolting awake at phantom sounds of metal crashing. No pacing the halls in anger or shame. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a balm on old wounds. The neighborhood felt different too. Where once curtains had twitched nervously, now neighbors stopped to chat when I checked the mail. Martha brought me cookies. A man I barely knew from the next block over gave me a firm handshake and said, "You saved us all a lot of grief." It was strange being treated like some kind of hero. I didn't feel like one. I hadn't gone into this fight for anyone but myself. But in exposing Derek, I'd apparently pulled a thorn from the entire community's side. 2 weeks later, the board convened again. This time, Derek wasn't seated at the front. He was on the agenda, and he didn't like it. He tried to defend himself, of course, claimed the footage was doctored, that my trash can had been unstable, that the witnesses were conspiring against him. But his words rang hollow. The evidence was undeniable. And the neighbors, the very people he had ruled over with fear and petty fines, weren't afraid anymore. One by one, they spoke. Testimonies about harassment, unfair fines, petty cruelty. The dam had burst, and all the resentment he'd built up came flooding out. The board voted unanimously. Derek was removed from his position, banned from holding office within the HOA, effective immediately. When the gavel came down, the room erupted in applause. Word spread quickly. The man who strutted the sidewalks like a king was dethroned. His clipboard was gone, his smirk vanished. He kept living in the neighborhood for a while, but he wasn't the same. Without authority, he was just another resident, and not a popular one. I'd see him sometimes, walking quickly, head down, no longer making eye contact. Once he even crossed the street to avoid me. It was strange seeing him stripped of that power. Almost pitiful. Almost. Because I remembered the sleepless nights, the garbages strewn across my lawn, the laughter, the humiliation. No, pity was too generous. Life settled back into something resembling peace. I trimmed my hedges when I felt like it. I left the porch light on without fear of a fine. I tended to my wife's roses again, clipping the dead blossoms, inhaling their sharp, sweet scent, as if she were still there beside me. The trash can stayed upright. Week after week, it stood like a sentinel by the curb, unmolested, waiting patiently for pickup. Each time I rolled it back to its place by the garage, I felt a quiet pride. A victory, small but powerful. It wasn't about the can, it had never been. It was about dignity, about not letting a bully take away the small joys of life, the roses, the porch, the hum of a neighborhood at peace. Looking back now, I realized Derek was just one man, but what he represented was larger. He was entitled. He was in control for control's sake. He was what happens when power goes unchecked in the hands of someone too arrogant, too insecure to wield it responsibly. And I was just one man too. One 60-year-old, tired, aching, missing his wife. But I learned something in that fight. Sometimes one person standing up is enough to crack the facade, enough to remind others that fear only lasts as long as you let it. Martha said it best, the day after Derek was voted out. She stood on my porch, eyes bright, and told me, "You gave us permission to stop being afraid." Those words have stayed with me. So what did I learn? That dignity isn't something you hand over. That home, the walls, the roses, even the old trash can by the curb, isn't just property. It's memory. It's freedom. And no clipboard-wielding tyrant has the right to take that away. When I sit on my porch now, coffee in hand, the wind chimes, my wife hung still singing softly in the breeze, I feel something I thought I'd lost. Peace. Hard-earned, battered, but mine. And every time the garbage truck rumbles down the street, lifting the bin, emptying it clean, setting it gently back on its wheels, I smile. Because they can never fall anymore. And because I know, sometimes the smallest battles, the ones fought on the curb, in the rain, over something as ordinary as a trash can, are the ones that prove who we really are. That even at 60, even when the world thinks you're too old, too quiet, too worn down, you can still stand up, you can still fight back, and you can still win.